Well, along those lines, you said color is where the brain and the universe meet. Could you expand on that idea a little bit?
I think color is a good place to start to unpack some of these ideas. I mean, colors are very, very important aspects of our lives. I mean, you're wearing this vibrant red jacket, at least it looks red on my screen. Color is not really out there in the world as color. It's not that objects are literally blue or red. They just reflect electromagnetic radiation. None of these things are actually colored. It's just different wavelengths of energy. And there's a very small part of that spectrum, the so-called visible spectrum. Out of combinations of these wavelengths, our brain creates a universe of colors.
So there is this video I changed upon, and it gives the individual assertions of all the fields and our relation to reality on the different levels from our psychic understanding, psychology, and neuroscience, which is the brain, and even on the quantum level, which is like the quantum physics we know of today. So, without much ado,
quantum physics shows that reality exists as potential until observed.
All right, so quantum physics, recently there was an experiment done, and the results keep changing when it is observed. So, for example, they will do experiment A, and the results will show this pattern, and they will do another one with observers, with people around, and the results will be totally different.
What quantum physics experiment broke reality?
It's called the double slit experiment. This is absolutely mind-blowing. What scientists found was that light manifested differently based on whether or not somebody was watching it. They observed it and they saw that when nobody was in the room, light would just be a wave with infinite potential. But as soon as somebody was watching, it would collapse into a single timeline particle. What this really means is that there may not be an objective reality outside of conscious perspective.
With what he's saying, it's clear that reality actually from the very quantum level actually alternates depending on whether we are watching it or not.
It was performed by Thomas Young, and it's called the double slit experiment. So basically, if you fire particles at a screen through a split, it will make this clumping pattern, okay? What if you add a second slit? You fire the particles, it makes two clumping patterns. So now let's do it with electrons. As you fire it through, you'll see a similar clumping pattern. So as scientists performed it with two slits, they expected to see two clumping patterns, but they didn't. What they saw was this, the interference pattern. For years, the scientists thought, well, maybe these electrons would collide with each other, and that's what causes this interference pattern. So in the 60s, they modified the experiment where they would only shoot one electron at a time, and it still made the interference pattern. So they wanted to see what was causing this, and so they made an observer. They wanted to record what was happening, and here's what's crazy. With the observer there, the electrons would make two clumping patterns. They would behave the way that they were supposed to. Without the observer, the interference pattern, depending on whether the particles were being observed or not, impacted the way that they would act. Like, how would a particle be aware of this?
Neuroscience reveals that our brains filter and shape that observation.
All right, so from the neuroscience perspective, which is from our mind, shows that our brains actually alter the reality we perceive.
My perception of the world is not only dependent upon my genetic construct, but more importantly, how my brain has been trained.
Exactly. I don't think people fully understand how much that influences literally the way you see and perceive the world. These primary things, like what you see and what you hear, are shaped by your experiences. And think about how that scales up to values and more abstract things.
Okay, so a typical example is that our brains actually detect colors more like our eyes only gather the wavelengths and our brains interpret them into blue, green, yellow, indigo, violet, etc. So on the real world, perhaps these things are not actually as our brain interprets them, meaning other creatures may see green differently from how our brain interprets it.
Neuroscience fun fact of the day is that color does not exist in physical reality, and I'll tell you why. The main components to this are first that objects do not have a color. Color is a sensation created by the brain from mixtures of different electromagnetic radiation. The brain created color so that we could keep track of surfaces under different lighting conditions. The way that we see color depends on the genetics of the cones in our eyes, it depends on the way that our brain is wired, and it also depends on the reality that we grew up in, that our brain developed in. This is why no two people see color the exact same way, because no two people have the exact same brain. If you remember the dress, when some people saw white and gold and other people saw blue and black, this is happening all the time and we don't even realize it. Also, we as humans can only sense a small slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. Birds, for example, live in an entirely different reality because they can see a whole different spectrum of light.
So the sky is only blue because our brain says it is blue. That is the kind of wavelength our brain gathers and filters it.
Psychology confirms cognitive biases alter perception.
All right, so from the psychology point of view, our biases, which is our indoctrinated knowledge and our upbringing, our environment, all these influence our thought processes.
You change your energy, you change your life. Don't expect anything in your life to change if your environment is controlling your feelings and thoughts. And
reality also can be affected if this is how we see things. So when you grow up with the ideological concept that this is bad and this is wrong, and it persists in your mind, if you go into a certain space that do not behave according to your reality, you begin to see things differently. So reality itself, according to the psychology of our mind, also functions very different.
Your mind doesn't see reality, it creates it.
Yeah. So again, our mind only does its job by making us live, which is by creating the reality for us to perceive. Hence, if you are given the opportunity to see reality as it is, you may not really comprehend it because of how enormous it may be to you. It will be overwhelming so much that you may not comprehend. Hence, our mind filters reality and makes us understand. And this is more of the neurology of how our brain works.
Neuroscientists have discovered that our brains are constantly generating predictions about what's going to happen next. This process is called predictive processing. Your brain uses your past experiences and knowledge to create a model of the world. It then uses this model to make predictions about what you're going to see, hear, or experience next. When sensory information comes in, your brain compares it to these predictions. If there's a match, great. If not, your brain generates what's called a prediction error and updates its model. It means that what we experience isn't a direct representation of reality, but rather our brain's best guess about what's out there.
Or at the very least, shapes your perception.
Okay, so this is more like what you believe also has impact on your perception of reality.
Right, but then do you leave any wiggle room for any personal truths for what happens after we die?
Well, within myself, I mean, I don't judge what others think or want or need to be true, or in their own sense of the world that they know to be true. In me, I don't have sufficient evidence that would convince me that anything other than my body decomposing at the whims of microorganisms and other flora and fauna, personally, I don't have any reason to think that anything other than that is going to happen to me.
So, for example, religions actually see the world differently. So people who actually believe that they are going to reincarnate, when they die actually exist, and people who think they are going to live somewhere else aside Earth also exist. Hence, our brains, which is how we assimilate things both environmentally and through our childhood, also determines how we see the world. Yeah.
But how do you know if there's anything outside of your perception?
Yeah, so in respect to what I was saying earlier, how do you know whether there is something outside of your mind? Because it is the mind that creates this reality.
The way in which we experience reality, that is a controlled hallucination. So, we never see things or hear things as they really are. The way in which we encounter objective reality is always a kind of construction that is very tightly geared to objective reality. Imagine you are your brain, you're trapped inside the skull, trying to figure out what's going on out there in the world. And from the brain's perspective, all it's got access to are these electrical signals, maybe a few chemicals swishing about. Things that are just very indirectly related to how things are. They don't come with labels on these electrical signals, all these chemicals. So from the perspective of the brain, figuring out what's going on has to be a process of inference, of best guessing, of the brain figuring out what is the most likely state of the world and the body.
What if there are actually no colors anywhere and our brain just creates them? How will you know? And how will you even know that what I call blue, what I see as blue, or what we all agree as blue, is what we all see as blue? Maybe you see something else that you call blue. How will I know? Because we can all point at the same color. I'll say it is blue, you will say it's blue, but we all see it differently because we grew up saying that it is blue.
If you've ever wondered whether other people see color the same way as you, according to current scientific understanding, the percent chance that anyone else sees color the same way as you is essentially 0. We all see colors differently, and I used to do research on this, so I'll tell you why. I used to work in a research lab doing something called a quantum catch, where we would take the genotype of the color detecting cells in different monkeys' eyes, and then we could map on a color plot how they would perceive fruits in the rainforest. And you could see how different monkeys would perceive the same color fruit differently. And humans are the same way. And genetic code is only one reason the color of your eye, like brown versus blue, can also change how you see color. And our personal experiences can also shape how we perceive colors. Neural circuits in the brain that are involved in color processing can adapt based upon our experiences.
If we apply Occam's razor, where the most simple explanation is most likely true, then it could be more probable that a single consciousness, one mind, imagines, dreams reality, than for an entire universe with billions of independent brains to exist, the Boltzmann brain.
Yeah, the concept of Boltzmann brain is also a very fascinating one. It is very deep, and we would need an entire episode to be able to, exhaust that.
There's a quote often credited to Einstein.
Well, actually, yeah, I've also seen a couple of pages that credit this quote to Einstein, but we are not really sure whether he's the one who said it because it doesn't come by video or sound, but it's mostly credited to him, but not on certainty. Yeah, but no one also has claimed it. Maybe it could be another person that has said it, but it's mostly credited to Einstein. Most sensible things about the world nowadays is credited to him.
Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a persistent one.
As you are living through this illusion of life, whatever your reality is, just stick to it and try to understand a lot about the world as much as you can.
Our brains are not designed to make us happy. They're wired for survival, a trait passed down from our ancestors. Back when facing saber-toothed tigers were a daily concern, this focus on potential dangers was crucial for staying alive. Fast forward to today, and although we live in a much safer time, our brains operate on the same old software. Instead of scanning for predators, we find ourselves stressing over text messages or worrying about others' opinions. This innate tendency to focus on the negative instead of the positive is just our brain doing its job. trying to protect us. However, it's important to remember that where our focus goes, our energy flows. When you catch your mind dwelling on the negative, acknowledge it, but then consciously shift your attention to the positive aspects of life. It's a practice of choosing where to direct your energy, because what's bad is always available, but so is what's good.